What if I told you that the most powerful man in America was left speechless by his own son? Imagine this. Late at night, inside the Trump family's private study, the weight of a nation's future hangs in the air. Outside, the wind howls against the towering estate, a storm gathering strength, just like the storm raging across America. And then, a question is asked. A question so raw, so piercing, that even Donald Trump himself does not have an immediate answer. This is not just a political discussion. This is a father and son standing on the edge of history, grappling with a truth no one dares to speak aloud. Stay with us until the end, because what happens next will change the way you see America forever. And before we dive in, if you believe conversations like these matter, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Let's jump in. The soft golden glow of a desk lamp flickered against stacks of neatly arranged papers, casting long shadows across the room. The air inside the study was still, almost too still, save for the quiet, rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. Donald Trump sat at his massive mahogany desk, flipping through briefing documents with a sharp, practiced efficiency. His mind was trained for battles, campaigns, business deals, media storms. But tonight, something different was coming, something he hadn't prepared for. Just outside the study, a figure hesitated. Barron Trump stood in the dimly lit hallway, his tall frame still and contemplative. He wasn't usually the kind to interrupt his father. He was more of an observer, always watching, always thinking. But tonight, something felt different. The weight in his chest had been building for weeks, pressing down heavier with every headline he read, every debate he overheard, every conversation that ended in shouting instead of understanding. America felt broken. And Barron, for the first time, wasn't sure if it could be fixed. He inhaled sharply, then exhaled. Enough waiting. With measured steps, he pushed the heavy door open. The hinges groaned slightly, making Trump glance up from his papers. His eyes softened for just a moment when he saw his son standing there, but he quickly straightened, sensing the seriousness in Barron's expression. "Barron," Trump greeted, setting his papers aside, his voice warm but laced with curiosity. "Everything all right?" Barron stepped fully into the room, the weight of the world seemingly on his shoulders. He hesitated for just a beat, long enough for his father to notice. "Dad, I need to ask you something." Trump leaned back slightly in his chair, giving his son his full attention. "Go ahead, son." Barron swallowed. He had rehearsed the question in his mind over and over, but now, standing here, facing his father, the man who had been both leader of a country and of their family, it suddenly felt much heavier. Finally, he spoke. "Is America dying?" The words hit the air like a thunderclap. For the first time in a long time, Donald Trump didn't have an answer right away. He slowly rose from his chair, walking toward the tall windows that overlooked the city skyline, the flickering streetlights below, the distant sound of sirens, the hum of a restless nation. It all suddenly felt eerily symbolic. Barron watched him carefully, his heart pounding. The silence stretched between them, and then, finally, Trump spoke. But what he said next, what he revealed to his son, was something no one saw coming. What happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about America. Stay with us, because the answer Trump gives is not what you expect. If you're as hooked as we are, smash that like button, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Let's continue this journey together. Now let's find out, is America really dying? This opening maximizes engagement, builds suspense, and pulls the audience into the story immediately. The cinematic details, emotional depth, and pacing ensure viewers stay locked in while setting up the next part of the video seamlessly. What do you think? Ready for the next scene? Is America dying? The words had barely left Barron's lips, yet they hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unmoving. For the first time in a long time, Donald Trump had no immediate answer. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the restless city below. The neon glow of New York shimmered against the dark glass, but beyond the lights, beyond the noise, there was something deeper. A country teetering on the edge. Barron's heart pounded in his chest. He had expected a quick response, a confident dismissal, maybe even a joke to diffuse the weight of his question. But instead, his father remained silent, his gaze locked on the skyline. as if searching for an answer in the distance. Then, finally, Trump exhaled, turning slowly to face his son. "Why do you ask that, Barron?" His voice was steady, but there was something else underneath, something Barron had rarely heard before. Doubt. Barron shifted slightly, his hands tightening into fists. "Because everywhere I look, it feels like we're losing something. The news, the streets, even my friends at school. People don't just disagree anymore, Dad. They hate each other. They don't even try to understand. Families are breaking apart. People are afraid to speak. It's like the country is eating itself alive." Trump studied his son carefully. The boy? No, the young man, standing before him wasn't just repeating something he had heard on TV. This was real. This was personal. "And what do you think, Barron?" he asked, his tone measured. "Do you think America is dying?" Barron hesitated. He had spent so many nights trying to answer that question himself, staring at the ceiling in the dark, scrolling through endless headlines, listening to the anger and voices all around him. Finally, he met his father's gaze. "I don't know." His voice was quieter now. "But I think it feels that way." Trump nodded slowly, stepping forward. "You know, people have thought that before. That America was over. That we couldn't come back from where we were. During the Civil War, brother fought against brother. Lincoln himself thought the country might not survive. In the Great Depression, people lost everything. Families had nothing to eat. The American dream? It was a joke to them. During World War II, we faced enemies who wanted to wipe us out. We weren't just fighting for land, Barron. We were fighting for our existence. And on 9/11, we watched as our own symbols of power and freedom crumbled into dust." He paused, letting the weight of history settle between them. "But we're still here." Barron frowned slightly. "So, you think this is just another tough time? That we'll just fix it?" Trump sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think this is different," he admitted. Barron blinked. He hadn't expected that. "America's always had enemies, Barron. But this time, the enemy is inside." The words hit like a hammer. "We're not fighting a foreign war. We're not rebuilding from a disaster. We're turning on each other. And that's the most dangerous thing of all." Barron swallowed hard. "So, what happens now?" Trump exhaled, looking at his son with an expression that was equal parts pride and concern. "That depends, Barron. It depends on whether we remember who we are, whether we still believe in what this country stands for." Barron shook his head. "And if we don't?" Trump's jaw tightened. "Then America doesn't die in a moment, Barron. It dies slowly. It dies when people stop believing it's worth fighting for, when they stop seeing each other as Americans and start seeing enemies instead." Barron felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "That's already happening, Dad." Trump nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the city, the occasional honk of a car, the whisper of the wind pressing against the glass. Then Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice lowering. "But let me ask you something, Barron. What do you think makes America strong?" Barron hesitated. "Our military? Our economy?" Trump shook his head. "No. Those are important, but they're not what keeps America alive." He stepped closer, placing a firm hand on Barron's shoulder. "America's strength isn't that we never fall. It's that when we do, we get back up. We fix our mistakes. We rebuild. We fight to become better." Barron looked down, his father's words swirling in his mind. "But what if this time we don't?" Trump's grip on his shoulder tightened. "Then it's up to your generation to remind us who we are." Barron stared at him, a sudden weight settling in his chest. For the first time he realized, this wasn't just about history. This wasn't just about politics. This was about responsibility. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. Cliffhanger, call to action, but before Barron could respond, there was a knock at the door. And the news that followed? It changed everything. What happens next will leave you speechless. Don't miss the next part. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the future of America? It's closer than you think. This scene builds tension, deepens the emotional connection between father and son, and sets up the next dramatic moment. Ready for the next part? Let's take this to the next level. Then it's up to your generation to remind us who we are. Trump's words still echoed in Barron's mind, heavy with meaning, charged with responsibility. He could feel it settling in his chest. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a challenge. Barron opened his mouth to respond, to tell his father that he wasn't sure if his generation was ready for that burden. But before he could say a word, a knock shattered the silence. It was sharp, urgent, the kind of knock that sends a shiver down your spine before you even know why. Barron and Trump exchanged a glance. Then, without hesitation, Trump strode to the door, his face hardening into the expression Barron had seen many times before, the look of a man who had spent his life expecting the unexpected. He pulled the door open. Standing there was a man in uniform. A soldier. His face was tense, his eyes flicking between Trump and Barron, as if measuring whether they were ready for what he was about to say. "Sir, you need to see this." Trump stepped aside, motioning the soldier inside. Barron instinctively sat up straighter, his stomach tightening. There was something in the air now, something that felt wrong. The soldier wasted no time. He pulled a phone from his pocket and handed it to Trump. "This just broke nationwide." Trump took the phone, and as soon as his eyes landed on the screen, his expression darkened. Barron couldn't see the screen, but he could see the way his father's jaw clenched, the way his breathing slowed. Barron leaned forward. "Dad, what is it?" Trump didn't answer immediately. He just turned the screen toward his son, and then Barron saw it. The news headline flashing across the screen. "Riots erupt in major cities. Political rally turns violent." His heart dropped. The footage was chaotic. Streets engulfed in flames, storefronts shattered, people screaming, clashing, running, a sea of rage and confusion swallowing the night. A reporter's voice crackled through the video. "What started as a political demonstration has spiraled into widespread violence. Officials are calling it one of the worst nights of civil unrest in years. Multiple injuries reported. Authorities are struggling to regain control." Barron could barely breathe. "Where is this?" The soldier hesitated. "It's not just one place, sir, it's spreading." Trump exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "Damn it." He handed the phone back and turned to the soldier. "What's our current intel?" "The situation is escalating. There are reports of clashes in several cities. Protesters, counter-protesters, no one's backing down, and—" The soldier hesitated, his expression grim. "There are casualties." Barron's chest tightened. "People are dying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The soldier nodded. "Yes, sir." "And the worst part? It's politically motivated. People aren't just fighting over policies. They're fighting because they see the other side as the enemy." A heavy silence filled the room. Barron swallowed hard. He had seen division before, on TV, online, even in school. But this was something else. This was war. Trump turned away, pacing toward the window, his fists clenched at his sides. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, lit by the distant glow of city lights. Barron watched him, heart pounding. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Trump's voice was lower now, controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "I have to speak, now." The soldier nodded. "The networks are already reaching out. They want a statement." Trump turned back to them, eyes locked on the soldier. "Not just a statement. A speech. Live." The soldier hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? The country is already on edge. Anything you say could—" "I know what's at stake," Trump cut in. "But we don't have the luxury of waiting. If we don't step in now, this spiral doesn't stop." He turned to Barron, his gaze sharp. "You wanted to know if America is dying, Barron." Barron felt his breath hitch. "This is how it happens. Not with a war, not with an invasion, but with Americans turning on each other until there's nothing left." A lump formed in Barron's throat. "Then stop it." Trump's expression softened, just slightly. "I'm going to try." The room was charged with urgency, but Barron felt something else creeping in, something unexpected. For the first time he saw it. The weight. His father had carried it for years. The responsibility, the impossible choices. He had always seen Donald Trump as invincible, as someone who never hesitated, never wavered. But now he saw the man beneath the title. And for the first time, Barron understood. This wasn't just about politics. This was about survival. Trump is about to go live, The entire nation is waiting to hear what he has to say. And what happens next? It will decide everything. Don't go anywhere. Hit that like button if you believe America can still be saved. Drop a comment. What would you say if you were in Trump's position? And make sure to subscribe because in the next scene, Trump steps up to the mic and the world holds its breath. This is history in the making. Stay tuned. This scene takes the story to the next level, injecting urgency, tension, and raw emotion. What do you think? Ready for Trump's speech? This is where everything changes. Trump is about to go live. The entire nation is waiting to hear what he has to say. The air in the study was thick with tension. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. The news of violent riots spreading across the country had shaken even the unshakable. Barron sat stiffly, his hands clenched into fists. The images of burning streets and bloodied faces were still fresh in his mind. His father stood near the window, phone in hand, preparing for the most critical speech of his life. The soldier stood at attention, waiting for orders. Then, a new voice entered the room. Donald. The room turned toward the doorway. Melania Trump stood there, poised, yet unmistakably concerned. Her presence carried a quiet power, one that commanded attention without needing to demand it. She wasn't just the former First Lady, she was a mother. A woman who had seen the best and worst of this country, up close and personal. Her eyes scanned the room, settling first on her husband, then on Barron. "What's happening?" she asked, though she already knew. Trump exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. "The country's unraveling." He turned to the soldier. "Give us a minute." The soldier nodded and stepped outside. Melania walked further into the room, her heels barely making a sound against the polished floor. She turned to Barron first. "You're worried," she said, more of a statement than a question. Barron met her gaze. "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. "I asked Dad if America was dying, and now I'm afraid of the answer." Melania studied her son, then turned to Trump. "Is that what you told him?" Trump sighed. "I told him it's on the edge. That it depends on whether people still believe in it." Melania nodded slowly. She glanced at the TV screen, where images of chaos played on a loop. Her expression was unreadable, but Barron saw something flicker in her eyes. Something he wasn't used to seeing in his mother. Pain. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city. Then she spoke, her voice steady but laced with something deeper, something personal. "America isn't dying," she said. "But it's lost." Barron blinked. "Lost?" She turned, facing them both. "A country doesn't die in a single moment. It doesn't collapse overnight. It forgets itself, little by little, until one day people wake up and don't recognize what they see. America isn't broken because of politics. It's broken because people stopped listening. They stopped believing they were on the same side." Trump crossed his arms. "And how do we fix that?" Melania took a slow breath. "By reminding them." Barron leaned forward. "Reminding them of what?" She walked over and sat beside him, placing a hand on his. "That we are more than our worst moments." Her words lingered in the air. Trump watched his wife carefully. "I came here from a country where people lived in fear," she continued, her accent slightly heavier with emotion. "Where they whispered in private because speaking the wrong words in public could destroy them. Where hope was not guaranteed." She turned back to Barron. "Do you know why I fell in love with America?" Barron shook his head. Melania smiled faintly. "Because here, hope is a choice." Barron frowned. "I don't understand. Hope isn't something given to you. It's something you decide to have. Even when things seem impossible, even when everything looks like it's falling apart. That's what makes America different. Not its money, not its power, but its ability to believe in something better, even when no one else does." Trump exhaled, walking toward the two of them. "And what happens if people stop believing?" Melania looked up at her husband. "Then we remind them why they should." Barron's mind was racing. Everything his mother said made sense, but what if it's too late? He whispered. Melania turned fully toward him now, her hands gently cupping his face, something she hadn't done in years. "It is never too late," she said firmly. Barron's throat tightened. Melania smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead like she used to when he was younger. "You are young, Barron. You will see things your father and I cannot, and you will have choices to make. You can choose to believe in America." Or you can choose to let it go. Her words were heavy, but they were true. Barron felt something shift inside him, a realization he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about his father's decisions. This was about him. About his future. About the future of his generation. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Then, Trump spoke. "I'm going live," Melania nodded. "Then remind them." Trump turned to his son. "Barron, what would you say to the country right now?" Barron hesitated. The weight of the question was immense. He glanced between his mother and father. Then, slowly, he answered. "I'd tell them that America isn't gone. It's just waiting to be found again." Trump's expression softened for the first time that night. "Then, that's exactly what I'll say. Trump is about to address the nation. Every word will matter. Every sentence will shape what happens next. Don't miss what comes next. If you believe in hope, hit that like button, drop a comment. Can America still find its way? And subscribe, because in the next scene, the world listens as Donald Trump speaks. This is where history is made." This scene adds deep emotion, a powerful new perspective from Melania, and a crucial shift in Barron's understanding. What do you think? Ready for Trump's speech? This is the moment everything changes. America isn't gone, it's just waiting to be found again. Barron's words still echoed in the room. His father had listened. His mother had reminded him of what mattered. And now, the moment had arrived. Donald Trump was about to address the nation. Not as a former president, not as a politician, but as a man standing on the edge of history, facing a country on the brink. And what he was about to say would decide everything. The studio was silent. A single red light blinked on the camera in front of him. The countdown had begun. Trump sat at a long wooden desk, a small microphone positioned just inches away. The American flag stood tall behind him, illuminated by the soft glow of overhead lights. Off camera, Barron and Melania stood together, watching. Barron's hands were clenched at his sides. He had never seen his father like this. So still, so measured, so uncertain. For a man who had built his entire career on confidence, this moment felt different. He wasn't walking onto a debate stage. He wasn't giving a rally speech. This was something else. Something heavier. The producer raised a hand. "Going live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera went solid. Donald Trump exhaled, then spoke. "My fellow Americans." His voice was calm, steady, no bravado, no theatrics, just a man speaking to his country. "Tonight, we find ourselves at a crossroads, a moment of reckoning. I've heard the voices, the anger, the fear, the frustration. I see what is happening in our streets, and I know many of you are asking the same question my own son asked me tonight. Is America dying?" Barron felt his breath hitch. "I won't lie to you," Trump continued, leaning forward slightly. "America is hurting. Deeply. We are divided in ways I never thought possible. We are turning on each other, and that is the greatest threat we have ever faced." His hands rested on the desk, fingers intertwined. "But hear me when I say this. America does not die because of struggle. It does not collapse because of hardship. No, our country only falls when we stop believing in it." The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the intensity in his eyes. "So the real question isn't whether America is dying. The real question is, are we willing to fight for it?" Trump paused, his gaze lowering for a brief moment. Then, in a voice softer than before, he continued. "There was a time when I doubted this country." Barron stiffened. His father never admitted doubt. "There were nights I wondered if the fight was worth it. If the people tearing each other apart even wanted to be saved. And then tonight, my son reminded me of something important. He reminded me that America isn't just a government. It isn't just policies or elections or who's in charge. America is the people. And the people? They are worth fighting for." Barron swallowed hard. His father had listened, and now he was speaking not just to a nation, but to him. Trump straightened in his chair, his voice growing stronger. "This is my challenge to you, America. We can continue down this path, choosing division, choosing hate, choosing to see each other as enemies, or we can make a different choice. We can choose to listen. We can choose to find common ground. we can choose to remember that being an American is not about being right or left, but about standing together. Because if we fail to do that, then yes, America will die. Not from an enemy abroad, but from the walls we build between ourselves. His eyes burned with conviction. But if we remember who we are, if we refuse to let go of the ideals that built this nation, then we don't just survive, we rebuild. We come back stronger. We prove once again that America is worth believing in. The studio was silent. Even the crew, the cameramen, the producers, everyone was frozen, hanging on every word. Because in that moment, Trump wasn't just speaking as a former leader, he was speaking as an American who refused to give up. And the country was listening. The red light on the camera flickered off. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, applause. Not from an audience, not from a rally crowd, but from the crew. One by one, they clapped, some with tears in their eyes, some with nods of quiet approval. Trump leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. He turned to look at his wife. Melania gave him a small, knowing smile. Then his eyes found Barron. Barron stared at him, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. That was the right answer, Dad. Trump let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I hope so, son. And for the first time that night, maybe in a long time, he truly believed it. America has heard Trump's words, but will they listen? This speech could change everything, but what happens next? That depends on you. Hit that like button if you believe America can still be saved. Drop a comment. Do you think Trump's words were enough? And subscribe, because in the next scene, we find out what happens when a country chooses its future. This is history in the making. Stay tuned. This scene is the emotional and narrative climax, where everything comes full circle. Trump's speech is not just political, it's deeply personal. What do you think? Ready for the final chapter? This is where we see if America listens. Donald Trump had spoken. His words had echoed across a nation on the brink, words that were neither scripted nor designed for applause. This wasn't about politics, it wasn't about winning. It was about reminding a divided people that they were still one nation. But speeches are just words. The real question was, would America listen? And in the quiet moments after the cameras turned off, in the stillness of a family that had just lived through history, Barron Trump realized something. This conversation was far from over. The red light on the camera had dimmed. The crew was packing up. The country had heard the message. But inside the studio, a different moment was unfolding. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, letting out a long, measured breath. The weight of what he had just done settled onto his shoulders like an invisible force pressing down. Across the room, Melania watched him carefully, her expression soft yet unreadable. She had seen him give 1,000 speeches, but this one was different. And beside her, Barron stood still, staring at his father, not as the businessman, not as the former president, but as a man, a father who had just told the world something that even he had once struggled to believe, that America was still worth fighting for. Trump met his son's gaze. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of performance, stripped of politics. Barron hesitated, searching for the right words. "I think," he exhaled, "I think that was the first time I really understood why you fight the way you do." Trump's brow furrowed slightly. "Oh?" "Yeah," Barron stepped forward. "I used to think it was just about power, about proving people wrong, but it's more than that." Trump didn't answer right away, because for the first time, Barron wasn't asking as a curious son, he was asking as someone who wanted to understand. Trump nodded, standing up from the chair. "It's always been more than that, Barron." "Then why does it feel like no one else sees it?" Trump's lips pressed into a thin line. He gestured for Barron to walk with him, leading him through the now empty studio and into the hallway, where the distant hum of voices faded behind them. They walked in silence for a few moments before Trump finally spoke. "Because people don't like being uncomfortable." Barron frowned. "What do you mean?" Trump glanced at his son, then back ahead. "It's easier to believe the other side is the problem, that if we just remove the people we disagree with, everything will be fine. But that's not how it works. It's never worked that way. America isn't built on everyone thinking the same way. It's built on people arguing, disagreeing, but still believing that we're worth standing together." Barron absorbed his father's words. So what happens if they don't believe it anymore? Trump stopped walking. He turned to face his son, his expression unreadable. Then we remind them. Barron studied him for a long moment. And if they don't listen? Trump's jaw tightened slightly. Then we keep talking. Barron nodded slowly, but his mind was still racing. This wasn't just about the riots. This wasn't just about one speech. This was about something bigger. His generation, the one growing up in the chaos, the one inheriting a nation that felt like it was crumbling beneath their feet. What were they supposed to do? Dad. Trump turned, waiting. Barron's voice was quieter now, more thoughtful. I think my generation is scared. Trump's gaze softened, but he didn't interrupt. We don't know what we're supposed to believe in anymore. Everyone is telling us we have to pick a side, that we have to hate the other, that compromise is weakness. And after a while, it just feels easier to stop caring. Trump exhaled, rubbing his jaw. I know. Then how do we fix it? For the first time all night, Trump didn't have an immediate answer. But then, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Barron. What's this? Barron asked, unfolding it. Inside were just a few words, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Build something better. Barron blinked. Trump crossed his arms. That's how we fix it. We don't sit around waiting for someone else to give us hope. We don't waste our time tearing each other apart. We build something better. Barron stared at the words, something deep inside him shifting. Not because it was some grand revelation, but because it was simple and because it was true. The final words, a never-ending conversation. They stood in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling between them. Then, do you really believe it, Dad? Barron finally asked. That America can still be saved? Trump looked at his son, at the young man who had challenged him tonight in ways no journalist ever could, and then? He smiled. I wouldn't have given that speech if I didn't. Barron's fingers tightened around the piece of paper. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he truly understood. Not just the fight, not just the struggle, but the responsibility. This wasn't just about the past. This wasn't just about history. This was about the future. And as long as people were willing to ask the hard questions, to keep having the difficult conversations, the story of America would never truly end, because the conversation never stops. And maybe, just maybe, that was the whole point. Final call to action: this conversation isn't just between Donald and Barron. It's between all of us. So now we ask you, what do you believe? Can America still be saved? If you believe in hope, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. Because stories like this, they matter, because this isn't just a story. This is our future. This ending ties everything together. Emotion, responsibility, and the idea that the future is still unwritten. What do you think? Was this the powerful, thought-provoking conclusion you wanted? Let's make this a story people will never forget.